Good morning. This is the 7th Intellectual Property Awareness Summit. If you're in, that's the right place for you to be. Today, here's the photographers here, good. In case you were wondering, today is International Women in Music Day. It's also Wear a Hat Day, and it's opening day for baseball. Now, the World IP Organization has a day called World IP Day, which is 4 weeks from tomorrow. Artificial intelligence does not have a day, not yet, but it will soon, eventually. AI and IP, what does it mean? Do we even know what intellectual property and AI mean together? We're still in the process of processing that. If you ask AI, it'll tell you something interesting, which I'll share with you in a minute. More pertinent is, what is AI without IP rights? Can it exist without IP rights? Both content, patents, trade secrets, trademarks. We don't know. You know, we're in the process of discovering that, and I think this event today will help us to move towards sorting that out. Is AI a tool for efficiency and creativity, or is it a threat to human thought and digital assets? Whatever it is, it won't be determined quickly. Today's discussion hopefully will help make the relationship a little clearer and the future a little less daunting. Announced recently is the National High School Debate. This year is going to be intellectual property rights. Should they be strengthened? Now, this is pretty amazing turn of events. It beat out nuclear weapons reduction and many other topics. And it's pretty, you know, we feel pretty good at CIPU, and other IP organizations should feel good that we actually, you know, are on the radar of something. 7,000 students will be debating IP rights, good and bad, and should they be strengthened. Hopefully they will use the right sources of information to understand should they be strengthened or not. We'll see. Although there are millions of generative AI responses, there are still a lot more questions than answers. When asked, what is the relationship between AI and IP rights? The ChatGPT responded, the relationship between AI and intellectual property rights is complex. AI-generated works can raise questions about ownership and copyright. Generally, the creator or owner of the AI system that generates the work holds the rights, but there are debates about this, especially with autonomous AI systems. I think there are a few lawyers in this room who may disagree with that response. But that was the actual response that when I posed it to ChatGPT. So what are the goals today? Think more clearly about AI and IP and the relationship. What is it, and what should we do about it if we need to do anything? AI is more than generative AI. That's probably the most important thing to come out of this. Not everybody realizes that. What are the types and uses of AI? What is the relationship of IP rights to AI data and output? The role of transparency in AI's growth, what is that about? Where, by whom, and how much does AI need to be governed, if at all? Those are some of the topics we'll be discussing, and hopefully we'll come away a little bit closer to answers. I want to thank our partners, Dan Brown and James Conley from Siegel Design Institute, McCormick School of Engineering, and Kellogg School of Business. They're great partners. I'll bring them up in a minute. They're National Academy of Inventor Fellows, both of them. They're both were public committee members for the USPTO, appointed position by, I believe, the USPTO director. And they're professors here, both of them. So I'll bring them up in a minute. There is a live stream that's taking place now. Hello, live stream people. We have about 50 people from places as diverse as Africa, I think Nigeria, Australia, and several people from the UK and others in Europe and the US. So that's you know, they couldn't come here, so we gave them a live stream. Ringers, caution. The first ringer we hear from the audience, you have to buy everyone dinner tonight. So please turn your ringers off. And I'm going to bring up Dan first for just a couple of minutes.
We're going to let Jim.
Oh, Jim? Okay, Jim is going to come up and say a few words, and then we're going to start with Alex Castrounis, our keynote for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce, for that kind introduction. On behalf of the Kellogg School facility and the Center for Research and Technology and Innovation, we welcome all of you to this event today. It is a topic that I have been immersed in. I see familiar faces that I have met along this journey, some of them academically, some of them professionally. All of these things have informed how I teach this topic. And I'm also delighted to see my students from the Kellogg School of Management, from the McCormick School of Engineering, the Siegel Design Institute, from the Pritzker Law School, from the Feinberg Medical School, from the Journalism School, the School of Communications, the School of Music. This topic has become of interest to all of our students. It is really a topic about agency. How do we understand how our creativity takes form and actually becomes an asset in the marketplace? This is a critically important conversation. Every time a new technology comes along, and I'm sorry to say, I've been around here long enough to see a lot of these new technologies, the whole system seems to be challenged. And we have to answer questions. Now, in this current context, we know these forms of artificial intelligence can generate knowledge. In some sense, they can possess knowledge. But the question is, who owns this knowledge? And who really gets to take ownership of it in a way that feeds Lincoln's system, where the fuel of interest feeds the fire of genius? So we're looking forward to all your contributions to the conversations that we carry forward today. And I thank you all for being here. Dan.
Thank you for coming. I'm going to echo all of Jim's comments. Obviously, I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but I guess Jim and I are a bit of bookends. He was actually my IP professor when I got my master's degree. He's aged much better than I have. But the funny thing is, we're both interesting people in the sense that we worked in industry for years, came back, got our education and, PhDs, and we're immersed in this innovative culture here at Northwestern, which is what I'm just going to talk about a little bit. We are very unique in the way we educate people. All of our engineers in freshman year take 2 design courses. And my definition of design, that's what I did my research in a PhD, is how humans seek, conceive, and create new knowledge. And where we're at now, I think, with generative AI is this rivalry between existing knowledge, new knowledge, and how that takes place. To that extent, I'm also an inventor like James, 45 patents, and brought a number of products out. And the whole playing field of protecting that knowledge is important to innovation and our economy and American-made jobs, et cetera. We're at the forefront, I think, of a radical change, struggling at the intersection of who's going to own that new knowledge. Is it going to be the human that prompted that AI, or is that AI going to be an inventor, as some people are arguing? And is that new knowledge copying existing knowledge and affecting copyrights and trademarks, or is it in a way that it's generating that new knowledge so that it is unique and it has its own individual property right? In any event, I'd like to also acknowledge our students that are here. Please reach out to them. You'll find some very interesting humans that came here to understand this design, engineering, interface versus going to a traditional other type of engineering or technology school. So with that, I'll let you guys get started, and we'll have our first group. Bruce, thank you for coming again.
Thank you, Dan. And least I forget, in addition to our co-host, Northwestern, we have a lot of supporters, partners, and affiliates. It's all on the homepage of the event site. It's also on the CIPU homepage. And we couldn't do this without them, both financially and morally and ethically and intellectually. So that we really do appreciate their support. We have about 24 altogether. Introducing you to the keynote, Alex Castrounis is a data scientist first and foremost, and he was a racing engineer for INDYCARs. Well, what does that mean? He means he was focusing on a tenth of a second and making it a little better and a little faster, the car, based on data that was collected, competitive data. It's a fascinating undertaking, and it includes artificial intelligence. And Alex is a teacher here in Kellogg at the MBA I program, which is MBA AI program. And I'm going to call him up. He's an entrepreneur and himself, and he has a lot to say. His company, by the way, is Y of AI. Alex?
Great to see you all. First off, I'd like to thank Bruce Berman, Dan Brown, James Conley for having me here today. Thank you so much. And the Center for Intellectual Property Understanding. It's truly an honor, and I'm very excited to see you all today and dive into some of these very important topics, which we heard about a little bit there in the introduction. Great. So to get started, how many of you have ever been to the Indianapolis 500? Show of hands. Okay, some of you. How many of you have ever been to any sort of professional motorsports race of any kind? Formula One, anything. How would you describe the races? Noisy, loud. What else? Thrilling, exciting, exactly. Absolutely. So I would agree. And so when I was a junior in high school, turns out, by the way, I was born and raised in Evanston, Illinois. I went to Evanston Township High School, go Wildcats. And there was a buddy of mine that was trying to convince me to go to the Indianapolis 500 year over year. And I was always like, yeah, that's so dumb. I have no interest in racing. Why would I do that? And then junior year in high school, I wound up going to the race, and this is what I saw.
Allenser Jr. has the lead. One more turn to go. Here they come. Coming to the finish line. Bob Jenkins, who's going to win it?
The checkered flag is out. Goodyear makes a move. Little Al wins by just a few tenths of a second. Perhaps the closest finish in the history of the Indianapolis 500.
So it wasn't a few tenths of a second, actually. It was a few hundredths of a second. It was 400ths of a second officially. And unofficially, the real gap between the winner and second place was 3/100ths of a second. So imagine driving from here to Toronto, Canada, around 250 miles an hour, concrete walls everywhere, 32 other competitors, all mayhem breaking out, all to finish and win a race by 3/100ths of 1 second. And by the way, that was not only the closest IndyCar or Indianapolis 500 race in history, it still is to this day. But one thing that really stood out to me then was I was just blown away by it. I was like, holy crap, the sounds, like you said, the sounds, the smells, the sights, the innovation, the technology, the competition, just everything about it was so exciting. And I literally decided right there and then that that's what I was going to do for a living. I told everybody I was with at the racetrack that day. I went home, told my family, told all my friends, I'm going to go work in IndyCar racing one day. Fast forward a bit, and after a bunch of hard work and a little bit of elbow grease and a little bit of luck here and there, getting my foot in the door, I wound up getting my shot and getting my foot in the door. And very serendipitously, I got hired by Al Unser Jr. himself, the very same IndyCar driver that won that Indianapolis 500 that got me excited about this industry in the first place when I was in high school. And he and the guy that engineered the IndyCar that they won in hired me as that engineer's assistant engineer to co-design this particular race car, which is sort of like, for those of you familiar with the 24 Hours of Le Mans, kind of like an LMP prototype sports car, sports racer type of car. So I co-designed that car, and then I also ran the factory racing team. And fast forward a little bit, I got my break in actual IndyCar racing. I moved to Indianapolis, Indiana, and I began what wound up being about a 10-year career in IndyCar racing. This is me on my very first day on the job. I arrived, and on a Sunday night, I started work at MyJack Conquest Racing at the time at 9 a.m. on a Monday morning, and I had to be in Miami, Florida to test a brand new car we had just got, which you can see here in the image, by Wednesday. And this car is a Lola chassis, and we just got this Formula One driver, Justin Wilson, who you see as well. So everybody's excited. We got this new car. We got this new driver. But I was way in over my head. These cars have like 80 to 90 sensors on them that measure everything you can imagine, like temperatures, pressures, wind speed, distance to the ground, forces through the suspension, steering angles, spring compressions, damper, acceleration and velocities, and the list just goes on and on and on. All of that you need to use to make these cars go as fast as possible. But sure enough, 3 days later, I was in Miami, and that was the beginning of the career. And over my career, I was fortunate enough to, do over 100 races worldwide on 5 different continents, won many races, got on many podiums, including the historic Final Champ Car race. And I was also fortunate enough to work with many of the great drivers, team owners, and so on. And yes, even McDreamy, for those of you that are Grey's Anatomy fans, he co-owned an IndyCar team that hired me to be a race engineer and race strategist for the Indianapolis 500 1 year. But one of the things I noticed when I arrived here is the data. There's like just so very much data, right? One of these cars can collect up to 1 trillion data points in just the Indianapolis 500 mile race alone. And so I mentioned the sensors, 80 plus sensors. There's telemetry data. These cars are collecting all this data and sending all the data over RF airwaves, sometimes over global satellite uplink. There's driver qualitative data. The driver's telling you using just natural language. Hey, the car's really good in turn 5, but then in turn 7, I feel like I'm losing it. I'm going to crash into the wall. All this sort of stuff. You have timing and scoring data from the IndyCar league itself. You have wind tunnel data and suspension testing data and simulation data and so on and so on. And so it's not so dissimilar to large enterprise corporations today that also have absolute mountains and mountains of data. So how do you make sense of all this data? How do you derive meaningful insights from this data at the pace that you need to get the insights at? And one of the things I noticed too was despite all this data, which clearly it should have been useful for something, there was still like this culture of like, oh, well, this is how we've always done it. So like historical precedent or gut feel or something like that. And it just always felt like we were leaving things on the table. Like we could be winning more or doing better, be faster at certain tracks if we just use this data in better ways, or be able to do race strategy better. Race strategy, for those of you that don't know, is trying to figure out in real time, split-second decisions as a race is going on. When do you pit? How much fuel do you put in the car? What tires do you put on the car? What tire pressures should you have? Should you change any wing angles? What are your other competitors doing? And so on. And that was what I was doing for the entirety of my career. And I love this quote from Thomas Edison. There's a way to do it better. Find it. So that's what I did. Luckily, I had a background in mathematics and advanced statistics and physics and all sorts of things. So I decided, you know what? I'm going to teach myself how to write software. I'm going to learn how to code and program. And I'm just going to create predictive models to help me make real-time decisions so that I have the right information, the right insights when I need it to perform as well as possible and stop leaving something on the table. So I created the software you see in the upper left. That was my fuel sort of race strategy software that was very predictive. I would use it during races in real time to predict out and forecast different scenarios and use that to help make decisions. And then at Andretti Autosport, I ran the vehicle dynamics and data science program that supported a 4-car IndyCar team. And me and my team basically pioneered the use of AI and machine learning in professional motorsports at the time. They didn't even have the term data science didn't exist yet. And so we basically built some software that could run tens of thousands of simulations of a given car setup or configuration on any given racetrack, and then create tons of data output from that, and then use machine learning methods to create models such that you can put in any kind of different configuration settings for the race car, something they call the race setup, and then predict what the lap time for that setup would be, as well as the handling of the car, which also can have a big impact on the performance of the car. But after pounding the pavement for way too long and missing all my summers and life events and weddings and you name it, I decided to get off the road and go into industry and go into the tech industry, and ultimately to founding my own business and teaching here at Kellogg. But one of the things I noticed is that there's many parallels between the racing world and the business world, even though they're very, very different. Like what kind of parallels? Well, instead of racetracks with different kinds of configurations, you have different industries and different sectors that have different kinds of and changing regulations, environmental conditions, economic conditions, and so on. Instead of relying heavily on a driver to drive results, you often need to rely on yourself to make advances and move the needle for your organization, your company, or what have you. Instead of your team or pit crew, right, you have your teammates and your colleagues. Again, hopefully all working towards a common goal to drive results for your organization, but ultimately it comes down to competitive advantage. And competitive advantage, getting ahead of the competition, whether in racing or in business. And a lot of times competitive advantage can come from differentiation, it can come from technological innovation, and from developing intellectual property. And speaking of, data can also be a major source of competitive advantage. And in fact, some people say data is gold. We're seeing that now with the large foundation model folks like OpenAI, right? These people that are making these large language models we're hearing about and so on, a big part of what's giving them their advantage is their data that they've curated and are using. And why is that? Well, it's because data encodes all sorts of really useful stuff, like correlations, like relationships, and I heard knowledge earlier, right? And things that you can use to get those insights, to make decisions, to pull the right levers when you need to pull them. But it's not just having the data that your competitors don't have. It's also being able to do things with the data that your competitors can't. And that's where we get into things like artificial intelligence. And for all intents and purposes today, we're going to just define artificial intelligence as intelligence exhibited by machines. And of course, now we see all these models that people are using, right? So you have your OpenAI ChatGPT, you have your Anthropic Claude, you have your, even the open source stuff. So we see open source models too, like Llama from Meta, or Mixtral, that's a big one right now. So generative AI, we talked about that a bit before. So the question then becomes, is winning worth it at any cost? And we'll get back to that question shortly. But before we do, let's talk about the benefits of AI. So unfortunately, as much as we love AI and machine learning to be like super simple, sort of small, tight topics, things, on the one hand, ChatGPT's launch to the world in November of 2022 is a good thing because it made everybody aware, and now we have global awareness around AI and so on. On the other hand, it sort of put horse blinders on a lot of folks where they sort of think AI equals ChatGPT, which was mentioned earlier, and that's just not the case. So AI is not just ChatGPT. AI is not just generative AI. AI is a lot more than that. And rather than get in the nitty-gritty, because I find that most of the time, most people really don't need to get into the nitty-gritty or care about the technical part, right? That's relevant to engineers and computer scientists, but not to business leaders and decision makers necessarily. So I like to talk about and think about AI in the context of what I call AI action verbs. So what can you do with AI? Well, you can automate things. You can augment things. That's something called human augmented intelligence. That's the idea of using AI to help us, automate some of those rote, tedious, minutia type tasks, administrative tasks that we have to do, so that we can focus on the things we want to do and be more productive and be more happy at work and so on, right? You can predict things, you can forecast things, You can recommend things and automatically group things like market segments so that you can market differently to different parts of your customer base, right? So the right promotion, the right price at the right time for the right people, and not the averages of the masses, and so on. And then we get down to this one right here, right there, this little inconspicuous little one or whatever, generate. Well, it turns out we can generate things is its whole thing in and of itself. So let's go to the next slide. With generative AI now, right? It's not just language models, large language models, which you can think of as like text-to-text generative AI. We have text-to-image generative AI. We have text-to-video generative AI, and so on and so forth. And very soon, we'll have text to all those modalities all at the very same time, AI. But even with text-to-text, just simple large language models, all of a sudden the number of use cases and potential ways to leverage these things for our benefit and our daily productivity, right, at the individual or team level has exploded exponentially, right? We can brainstorm and ideate with these tools. We can learn and understand complex things by asking ChatGPT to summarize something for a fifth grader to us. And we can do all these other things. We can research things. We can write things like emails or articles, blog posts. We can generate things like lists and outlines, quiz questions. We can compare things like we can use these tools to help us create like a cost-benefit analysis or pros and cons list, and so on. The list goes on and on. But we can summarize, so that's the action verb way of looking at it. But we can summarize the benefits of AI with these things. And this isn't exhaustive by any means. So AI ultimately lets us work smarter, not harder. It lets us do more with less. It lets us be proactive instead of reactive. That's very important. It lets us ultimately do things we can't do. I don't know about you guys, but I'm not a copywriter at all. I can write technical things. I wrote a book published on AI, but copywriting and sort of marketing type stuff, not good at. You don't want me anywhere near that. But with these tools, all of a sudden, now I can. They're very helpful for that. Like I could do all sorts of stuff. I could create images that you're seeing on all these slides, including this one, even though I'm not a photographer, I'm not an illustrator, I'm not a whatever. And we'll get back to those concepts here in a bit. And we can use AI to innovate and get ahead. And of course, we can tie all these kind of things to the typical P&L type stuff, right? We can, when we're able to do all these things, we can then increase revenues, we can save money, and so on. And of course, AI can be used in lots of really positive, impactful ways, an area that many of us refer to as AI for good. So AI currently today, not in the future, today right now, is being used to help prevent illegal deforestation. It's being used to help prevent illegal poaching of animals. It's being used to reduce pollution and plastics in the ocean and thereby increase marine health and increase marine biodiversity, help save coral reefs that are dying. It's being used to reduce carbon emissions in the atmosphere, resulting in better air quality, which is better for our lungs and our health, and for other reasons related to climate change and so on and so forth. Natural disasters, AI is being used to better predict and help mitigate injuries and deaths from natural disasters. It's being used to help people with disabilities, whether it's related to sight or hearing or so on. It's being used in ways to create new non-invasive disease and illness detection methods and to personalize treatments to result in better health outcomes, and similarly for pharmaceuticals to find more effective drugs for different kinds of illnesses and get them to market quicker, again, resulting in better health outcomes. So going back to the question about winning at any cost, right? Maybe the better question is winning at what cost? And in this particular talk, the costs that we're really talking about are going to be related to intellectual property rights. So the question also becomes, is AI the bad guy? And we'll come back to that. How many of you are musical theater fans? Nice. Yeah, me too. My wife and I are long time subscribers to Broadway in Chicago. In fact, we went to see Peter Pan last night. Pretty good. If you haven't seen it, check it out. What are some of your favorite shows? Just yell them out. Wicked. Okay. Okay. Anything else? Beauty and the Beast, classic. Wicked, yeah, the Wicked one's a good one, and you'll see why. But I'm a huge Jonathan Larson fan, big time. Like, so Tick, Tick, Boom, Rent. But I love it all. I love it all. I've been going to like pretty much every show that comes to Chicago for a very long time. But speaking of Wicked, by the way, so thanks for throwing that one out there. The other night I was sitting on the couch and I was very excited to see the trailer of the new Wicked movie that's coming out, I think, Thanksgiving. So of course, I do what anyone does in that situation. I fire up YouTube and I watch the trailer and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm into it. I'm ready. I can't wait to see the movie. But because YouTube is very algorithmically driven, just like many technological platforms that we use day in and day out, it then immediately recommended that I watch the NPR Wicked Tiny Desk concert. And as one does, of course I'm going to watch that. So I watched that right away. And one thing that just stood out to me, and it's funny, this was like literally 2 weeks ago, and I was thinking about this talk. And there's a part in it, by the way, if you like Wicked, I highly recommend checking it out. But there's a part in it where the guy you see there, Stephen Schwartz, he's the composer and lyricist of Wicked, wrote all of it. You know, he starts telling a story, and he's like, you know, so there's this song in the show, it's called I'm Not That Girl. And I was I made a note here. He says, you know, I was looking for something, I knew I wanted to write this thing as a simple, heartfelt, but restrained ballad. That kind of sounds like a prompt, by the way. But anyway, so he says that. And then he says, you know, and I was thinking about it, and there's this song I grew up with and I love so much. It's like a Scottish folk song called I Know Where I'm Going. And it was recorded by someone named Ronnie Gilbert in a band called The Weavers. And so he then says, so I'm going to play that song first before the Wicked song. I'm going to play that song that Ronnie Weaver performed. And then I want to see, then we'll do I'm Not That Girl, and you tell me if you hear any similarities, right? And he does it, he plays it, then they perform live I'm Not That Girl, and it's like immediate, instantaneous. There's no question about it. You get it right away. And he's saying, like, I was heavily influenced, I was inspired by that song, and I wanted to leverage, you know, a lot of what that song has as qualities in this particular song in Wicked. And that got me thinking, and I thought about this even before that, and I'm sure many of you in the room have as well, that AI learns in very much the exact same way that we all learn, right? Like, whether we're going to be a musical composer like this, or we're going to be an artist, or a writer, or a sculptor, doesn't matter. We're going to go look at all the different eras through time, and the different styles, and the different formats, and the greats. We're going to learn from them all, and hopefully we don't plagiarize people's work, and then we go out and we create original things that may or may not be very heavily inspired by and or influenced by others' works. So if AI then trains on those very same things that we would then learn from, whether in university or wherever else, is that different? And remember earlier we talked about data. Data is gold. But the question, I said I would get back to it, is AI the bad guy? Well, maybe not. Maybe it's something else. So data, for example, is it intellectual property? You all in here probably know a lot better than I do to answer this question. I'm an AI guy, not a lawyer and not an IP person. However, my understanding is that data is considered facts most of the time, and facts are not considered copyright. Presentation of data and other things could be, but again, you probably know better than I do. What about things like licensing permission? Is it okay to scrape and use people's data without licensing or permission? Is it okay to potentially violate companies' terms of use or terms of service? What about giving credit or providing compensation? Is it okay to use people's art and music and work and things and not credit them and give those types of things? And that brings up the question of fair use, right? Which is kind of funny because this becomes one of the North Star things that we're trying to answer these questions through, right? We're using as something we might have this argument or debate or postulate or hypothesize through. And yet what's so interesting is my understanding, again, many of you probably know better, there's no bright line rules about what is or isn't fair use. And in fact, fair use is determined on a case-by-case basis according to 4 different factors that copyright law establishes. So that's interesting. Is this fair use? So I typed in intellectual property like 2 days ago. This is a screenshot from 2 days ago. And Google which by the way is a paid service, a commercial paid service, right? On the same page there were ads. So they're making money off delivering the service of search results, right? So, but they're using, so I typed intellectual property and they brought back something from a third party, International Trade Administration, a little tidbit there, and then they did something from Wikipedia, even a few images. Is that fair use? Maybe. It's small amounts, they didn't use too much. They also provided attribution and citations, so that's fair. So yeah, maybe that's fair use. It's still being used to deliver a service they make money off of, but again, I'm not a lawyer, I don't know. Some other people aren't so happy, and clearly they can do that, and they've been doing that for a long time. So it must be fair use, I guess. But other folks aren't so happy about this stuff, right? Like New York Times right now has a pretty significant lawsuit going against OpenAI and Microsoft for use of their articles, they claim. And then Getty Images, right? They have another lawsuit that's going on right now. They're suing Stable Diffusion, really the company Stability AI, and they're saying that they copied 12 million images to train an AI model without permission or compensation. And this is another one that's kind of funny, right? So now we have some of the AI companies, and they're like, don't worry about it. If you get sued, we'll pay for it. It's all good. We'll just, yeah, don't worry about it. So that's interesting. We'll see what happens there. And something that was mentioned in the intro, too, that's kind of interesting is this idea of ownership. Like, who owns this stuff that's generated by AI? We know in many cases who owns the things that these AI models are trained on, in the case of people's, like, copyrighted content and so on. But less so maybe in the output of these models. And in fact, my understanding is that many of these things cannot be copyrighted. So, like machines can't have intellectual property rights. And one other thing worth mentioning, going back to things like fair use, is why do we have so many questions and why is it such a challenge to sort all of this out? Well, it turns out that copyright laws here in the first of all, things can't be illegal or unlawful unless there's rules and regulations by which to abide by, or legislation. That's number one. Secondly, current copyright laws were originally written in 1790 and not updated again until 1976. That's my understanding. 1976. So let's put that in perspective. In 1976, the Apple I computer was launched. Also, the 5 1/4 floppy drive. Do you guys remember? Show of hands. Who remembers 5 1/4 floppy drives? 1976. You know the 3 1/2 floppy drive didn't come out till 1982, by the way? 1977, so a year after the copyright law, the Atari 2600 and Apple II. In 1982, the Commodore 64. How many of you had one of those? Yep, that's a good one. That's a class. I wish I had one in my living room right now. That would be a conversation piece for sure. World Wide Web wasn't even invented until 1989. Dot-com era and the bubble burst of the dot-com era didn't happen until 1995 or 2000, and then the first iPhone didn't come out to 2007. So we're using laws to try and answer these questions or have a lens to view these questions through from a time when the Apple I computer was launched and no internet, none of this stuff. So what's going to happen next? How are these problems going to be resolved and questions answered? Well, again, probably many of you in this room know a lot better than I do, but I imagine with these different lawsuits, they're going to have to go through the system and ultimately wind up in the Supreme Court and have some people that are good at, weighing all the pros and cons and looking at the different kinds of laws that exist and so on and figuring it all out, coming up with the answers. And largely it becomes also a question of risk-benefit analysis too. The good news with AI at least is that most of the AI leaders and experts that I follow anyway out there in the world tend to believe that the benefits of AI, the potential positive impact and benefits of AI to humanity and everything else far outweighs the risks. But not that there are no risks or that they shouldn't be addressed, because they should. It's just that when doing a risk-benefit analysis, hopefully the benefits outweigh the risks. So I'm an optimist. I always view things as a cup is half full. In fact, there's been many technology platforms. I won't name names, but some of them show videos, and I may have even talked about them at one point, and other platforms that have had major copyright issues in the past and major lawsuits and all that. But as a result of those things, put in place different kinds of mechanisms by which to try and detect infringement issues and detect certain things and deal with it and handle it and flag things and so on. And so a lot of things, from my understanding, has gotten better over time because people are having these conversations. They're having conferences like right now and things like that, having these discussions, and then, through these different lawsuits and so on, we'll see where things go. So perhaps I've raised more questions than I've answered today, but hopefully I've raised the right questions to ask. And with that, thank you very much. Appreciate it.